Take you back to the top story this afternoon, those floods in KwaZulu-Natal, and get an understanding of what's behind such extreme weather. We're joined this afternoon by Professor Anthony Turton, affiliated professor in the Center for Environment Management. That's at the University of the Free State. Prof, always good to have you on. Let's put into scientific context, if we can, the disaster that we've just been watching unfold in KwaZulu-Natal.
Yes, I'm living right in the middle of it right now. In fact, we just had a wall collapse in the complex that I stay in. I stay in the Port Shepstone area. But we've seen a lot of changes take place, certainly in the last decade, in an accelerated way on the climate side. We're starting to see more and more of these major rainfall events hitting us on the East Coast. We used to have them before, but now we're having them of greater severity, and they tend to be staying for longer. And of course, when you get this very, very heavy rainfall cell that stays in one area for a long period of time, dumping tons and tons of rain onto a system that is already been degraded because of lack of maintenance or infrastructure, drains that are blocked on highways, etc., we're starting to see a situation now where highways become rivers and where we get major washaways. So we are certainly seeing a disaster unfold in KZN. But it's part and parcel, I believe, of the overall shift in the pattern of weather and rainfall type events over time.
Mm-hmm. You talk about a shift. We saw similar scenes in KwaZulu-Natal in 2019 when there was a massive storm then for several days. I think it was from the 18th of April that year to about the 22nd. By the end of that disaster, over 80 people had died. Is this the new normal for KZN, especially around the April Easter period?
Yes, so as a scientist, I work with empirical data and facts, and I can refer to a very high-confidence study that was funded by the Water Research Commission in around about 2018, around about then. The study was done by the University of Cape Town, and what they did was they looked at rainfall, all rainfall in the country from 1950 until the present, so it's quite a long data set that they took, and they looked at a statistical deviation from the norm. In other words, what they said was, if the average amount of rain in a given area was supposed to be X, then what was the actual rain, more than or less than that? And they color-coded that in the 4 seasons of the year. And coming from that very high-confidence study, we saw a remarkable thing. We saw that from 1950 until 1982, we had a wetter-than-average period. And from 1982 until now, we're having a drier-than-average period, but we're also seeing a major shift in the seasonal distribution of rain and the increase of very high impact events over a relatively short period of time. So we might still be getting the same average as normal, or even a little bit more than normal, but it's the deposition of that water in a very short period of time over a relatively concentrated area that becomes very destructive. So empirically, we've got no question of doubt that we've been changing, and 1982 was pretty much the pivotal year.
So it's not that it's raining more, it's just same amount of rain over a shorter period. Anything then that can be done as far as human intervention to limit the scale of the disaster?
Yes, so that starts bringing into question things like engineering design. You must appreciate that things like bridges, drains, stuff like that, they've all been designed to certain engineering standards based on historic evidence. So now that historic evidence is increasingly becoming inaccurate or irrelevant, so we sit now with old infrastructure. In many cases, maybe the earliest infrastructure is 50 years old, maybe the oldest is over 100 years old. And that was designed to a standard that no longer is appropriate to the current rainfall events. And then, of course, on top of that, we haven't really invested properly into the maintenance and the upgrading of these things. So we are sitting with aged infrastructure that is poorly managed, and we therefore are unfortunately increasingly vulnerable as a country and as an economy, because it's not just one crisis, it's one crisis after the other after the other. So it's the repetitive nature of the COVID crisis, then the rainfall crisis, then the water crisis, then the health crisis, all of these things one on top of the other. That's the nature of the catastrophe that we're facing now.
And to what extent, Prof, does the layout of KwaZulu-Natal itself disadvantage the area, especially in the event of heavy rain over a short period of time?
Yes, a large portion of the KZN area was created geologically in a very interesting time period around about when the dinosaurs were roaming around, where a lot of the rolling green hills of KZN are in fact nothing more than sand dunes that have been blown there by the wind over millions of years of time. So as soon as that stuff gets wet and wet to a point of saturation deep into the soil pile, it becomes jelly and it simply flows away. So we can absorb a certain amount of rain, but we get to a point of catastrophic failure. And we see now, for example, in parts of Umhloti, where there's recently been some new urban developments, and those urban developments have in some cases been washed away now completely or severely damaged. But those urban developments come on top of a transition from a sugarcane manufacturing or processing industry that is now in its sunset years, and the cane land is now being repurposed for residential use, and the EIAs that have been done are maybe not necessarily adequate for it, etc., because you get this very fine powdery sand or soil that is now super saturated and it flows like water. Once it reaches a certain point of viscosity,